I don't remember the moment I stopped being a child. I only remember the silence that replaced my laughter. It was the kind of silence that seeps into a house after too many arguments, too many slammed doors. The kind that doesn't come all at once. It grows like dust collecting in corners no one cleans anymore. I must have been 9, maybe 10. But I already felt like I had lived 100 years. There was always something about our house that made me feel like I was trespassing in it. The walls held a kind of tension that hummed like electricity. Something unsaid, something heavy. My father's boots by the door were the loudest thing about him. He didn't talk much. He didn't have to. The weight in his step said enough. Every evening, he'd come home from work smelling like metal and tiredness, drop his keys on the table, and sink into the couch like gravity was pulling harder on him than on the rest of us. My mother used to talk, used to hum while cooking, used to brush my hair with gentle hands. But somewhere between the unpaid bills and the quiet disappointments, her voice thinned out. By the time I turned 10, she only spoke when necessary. Instructions mostly. Never affection. Never softness. It was like she was saving her words for something better that never came. I learned early that love wasn't loud in our house. It didn't come from words or hugs. It came from routine, from my mother leaving an extra slice of toast on my plate before school, or my father fixing the loose hinge on my bedroom door without saying a word about it. But even that kind of love felt like ration water. Carefully measured. Carefully hidden. When my father left, he didn't make a scene. He never would. He just didn't come home one night. The next morning, my mother sat at the table staring at the steam rising from her coffee. The cup trembled slightly in her hands. That's how I knew he wasn't coming back. There wasn't any crying. Not even shouting. Just a quiet, resigned nod, like she'd been expecting it. I didn't understand then how adults can mourn without noise. I only knew that something had ended, and no one would tell me what to do next. That night, I found my little brother, Adam, crying in his bed. He asked me if Dad was dead. I didn't know what to say, so I told him yes, because somehow that felt easier to explain than abandonment. He stopped crying after that. And so did I. Maybe that was the moment I became the man of the house. Not by choice, but by default. Our house changed after he left. It became smaller, colder. The silence grew thicker. I started waking up earlier than everyone else, packing lunches for school, checking that Adam's homework was in his bag. Mom started working double shifts at the pharmacy. I stopped asking her to help me with mine. When you're a child and the adults around you collapse, you start believing it's your job to keep the world standing. I thought that's what strength was. Holding everything together even when your hands were shaking. I didn't realize it was actually fear. I remember one winter morning vividly. The power had gone out during the night, and the house was freezing. Mom was already gone for her shift. The heater didn't work, and Adam was complaining that his socks were wet from the leak in the ceiling. I found myself standing on a chair, trying to tape a plastic sheet over the dripping spot, shivering, my fingers stiff from the cold. It wasn't even about the leak. It was about the way I refused to let it beat me. I think I was 11. That morning, I didn't feel like a boy. I felt like an adult who had forgotten what warmth felt like, not just in the air, but inside himself. The years that followed blurred together, school, work, responsibility. I started collecting small adult habits. Drinking black coffee even though I hated it. Writing to-do lists on scraps of paper. Saving coins in a jar labeled emergency. I didn't know what kind of emergencies I was preparing for. Maybe all of them. The other kids at school would talk about summer trips and birthday parties. I'd smile and nod like I understood, but my summers were just longer days of babysitting and helping Mom with bills. I wasn't angry about it. I was proud. Proud to be needed. Proud to fill a role that no one asked me to fill, but everyone depended on. That's the cruelest part of growing up too fast. You don't realize what you've lost until years later, when someone asks you about your childhood and you realize there's nothing left to describe. One evening, I found my mother asleep at the table. Her hands still held a half-written grocery list. The light above her flickered, buzzing softly. Her face looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in weight. I wanted to wake her, to tell her she didn't have to do this alone. But then I realized she probably thought the same thing about me. So I let her sleep. I sat across from her and listened to the sound of the clock ticking. Each second felt like a reminder that time wasn't waiting for either of us. Sometimes I wonder how much of my personality was shaped by fear. The fear of losing control, the fear of needing someone. When you grow up in chaos, control becomes your only comfort. I started planning everything. How much to spend, when to study, what to say. I thought if I could manage the small details, maybe the big ones wouldn't fall apart. But they always do. By 13, I'd become an expert at pretending I was fine. I didn't talk about my father. Didn't ask questions. Didn't cry when I saw other kids with theirs. I told myself it didn't matter. That I was stronger for it. But late at night, when the house creaked and the wind pushed against the windows, I'd lie awake and feel something hollow sitting in my chest. Not sadness exactly, but absence. Like a part of me had been scraped out and replaced with responsibility. And the worst part, no one ever told me I was doing too much. They just said I was mature for my age, responsible, dependable. Compliments that sounded a lot like condolences. There's a photograph I still have. It's me and Adam in front of the old house. He's holding a toy car, smiling, and I'm standing behind him, my hand on his shoulder. Everyone who looks at it says the same thing, that I look protective. But when I look at it now, I see something else. I see a kid who's already learned how to carry a burden too heavy for his size. I see the quiet exhaustion behind his half-smile. That's the thing about growing up too fast. The world mistakes your survival for strength. I think I learned silence before I learned love. Because love, to me, was always something fragile, something that could vanish overnight like my father did. Silence felt safer, predictable. It never left me. So I carried it with me, tucked between my ribs, into my teenage years and beyond. And maybe that's where this story really begins. Not in what happened, but in what I learned to hide. Because when you grow up too fast, you don't just lose your childhood. You lose the right to fall apart. By the time I turned 15, I had already forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. I didn't notice it happening. It was gradual, like a slow erosion. One small responsibility after another, until I wasn't a son anymore, just a function. I woke up early, made breakfast, helped Adam with homework, went to school, came home, worked a part-time job, paid bills when Mom forgot, and stayed up late fixing what she was too tired to fix. The rhythm of it all became my identity. Survival disguised as maturity. I used to think I was different from other kids. Smarter, more disciplined. But deep down, I was just tired. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't show on your face. It hides behind small smiles, behind perfect grades, behind the polite yes ma'ams and I'm fines. I carried that exhaustion like a badge of honor. It made me feel valuable, needed. But what I didn't realize then was that being needed and being loved are not the same thing. At school, I learned how to disappear. I didn't talk much. I stayed quiet, observing how other kids laughed, touched, connected. I envied them in silence. I couldn't relate to their worries, breakups, curfews, college applications. My worries were different. How to stretch Mom's paycheck until Friday. How to make sure Adam didn't see how scared I was. How to keep the lights from getting cut again. There was a girl once, Lena. She sat 2 rows ahead of me in history class. She had this careless way of being alive that both fascinated and frightened me. She laughed too loud, asked too many questions, always carried a book under her arm. She didn't know it, but she was the first person who ever made me question my own stillness. One afternoon, she sat next to me in the library. She smelled like rain and ink. She asked if I'd help her study. I said yes, but I couldn't focus. I kept watching how easily she existed, how her emotions flowed without restraint. I wondered what it would be like to live like that, unguarded, unmeasured, free. For a few months, she became my escape. We'd talk after class, walk home together, share music. She said I made her feel safe. I didn't know how to tell her that safety wasn't something I believed in. Still, I liked the way her presence softened the edges of my days. For a while, I felt young again. But love, or what I thought was love, scared me. It demanded vulnerability, something I had buried years ago. Every time she got close, I'd pull back. Every time she reached out, I'd find a reason to withdraw. I wanted her to see me, but not the parts that were broken. So I hid behind silence, hoping she'd understand without me having to explain. She didn't. Eventually, she stopped trying. One day, she walked past me in the hallway without saying a word. It was like being erased. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was fine. But that night, I sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the kind of emptiness that doesn't even hurt anymore. It just exists. That's when I realized something terrifying. I had become too good at being alone. The following months were quiet. Mom was always working. Adam was getting older, more independent. I started feeling invisible in my own home. No one asked how I was doing because they assumed I was fine. I had taught them to. I had taught everyone that I didn't need help. And once people believe that, they stop offering it. I remember one evening, coming home to find the kitchen light flickering again. I stood there for a long time, watching it pulse, bright dim, until it finally went dark. I didn't fix it. For the first time, I let it stay broken. Maybe I was tired of being the one who fixed everything. Maybe I wanted someone else to notice the darkness. No one did. That's the thing about being dependable. People stop seeing your exhaustion. They only see your strength. And strength, once expected, becomes your prison. Around that time, I started working longer shifts at the local grocery store. The manager liked me, said I was mature, reliable. I learned how to fake calmness even when I was falling apart. Customers would smile, thank me, move on. No one knew that between bagging groceries and stocking shelves, I was slowly losing pieces of myself. Every night, I'd walk home under the same flickering streetlights, feeling older than I should have. I'd think about Lena sometimes, about how easily she must have moved on, and I'd tell myself I didn't care. But deep down, I missed the version of me that existed when she was around, the one that still believed he could be seen. One night, Adam came into my room. He asked if I was happy. I didn't know how to answer that. I told him I was fine, the same way I told everyone else. But when he left, I sat there staring at the door, realizing how heavy that word had become. Fine. It was the armor I wore every day. It sounded safe. It sounded controlled. But underneath it, everything was cracked. By 17, I had mastered the art of emotional invisibility. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't dream. I just functioned. People called it maturity. I called it survival. Somewhere inside, the boy who wanted to be held had been replaced by a man who only knew how to hold others. I became everyone's rock, and in doing so, I forgot how to be human. That year, Mom collapsed at work from exhaustion. They said she'd been skipping meals, overworking. I sat beside her hospital bed, staring at the monitors. She looked so small, so fragile. I realized I didn't remember the last time she had laughed. Or the last time I had. When she woke, she smiled weakly, told me not to worry. And I nodded, pretending to believe her. But something in me broke quietly that day. Not in a dramatic way. More like a hairline fracture that had been forming for years finally reached its limit. I walked home that night feeling like I was walking beside my younger self, the boy who used to think he could fix everything. I wanted to tell him he couldn't. I wanted to tell him it was never his job. But it was too late. The man he'd become didn't know how to stop. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stand in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I didn't see a teenager anymore. I saw a tired adult wearing a child's face. My eyes looked older. My posture heavier. I had grown up too fast, too hard, too silently. And no one noticed. Maybe they never would. Maybe that's what happens when you teach the world you're fine. It believes you. That was the year I stopped waiting for anyone to save me. Because somewhere along the line, I had accepted that the only person who could was the same person who kept breaking me, myself. Adulthood didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in quietly, disguised as routine. Bills, deadlines, responsibilities. The same rhythm I'd always known, just with bigger stakes. By 24, I was living alone in a small apartment that smelled like coffee and solitude. Everything I owned fit neatly into the corners of that space. No clutter. No noise. No reminders. I told myself I liked it that way. Order gave me comfort. Clean lines, closed drawers, surfaces wiped until they reflected light. Control became my version of peace. I worked a steady job at an auto shop. The days were predictable. Engines, oil, silence. I liked the way the machines responded to effort. You fix what's broken and it stays fixed. People weren't like that. They came with emotions that didn't make sense, with expectations I didn't know how to meet. So I avoided them. I told myself I was focusing on my future, but really, I was just hiding from connection. My coworkers used to joke that I was married to my work. They weren't wrong. I treated every project like it was proof that I was enough. The more I achieved, the quieter my thoughts became. For a while it worked. I built a life that looked stable from the outside. A decent apartment. A car. Money in the bank. But inside I felt nothing. No excitement. No fulfillment. Just an endless checklist. Stability without joy. Success without softness. I had become exactly what the world rewarded. Composed, self-sufficient, unbreakable. But it was all armor. Every decision I made came from fear. The fear of being helpless again, the fear of needing someone who could leave. I didn't realize it then, but I had become my father in a different form. Cold, distant, reliable only in function. One night, I came home after a long shift. I dropped my keys on the counter, sat in the dark, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't know who. I hadn't kept in touch with anyone from school. Mom still worked too much. Adam had moved out of state. The silence felt heavier than it used to. I turned on the TV just to fill the air, but even the noise felt empty. That's when I started noticing how every night looked the same, how my life had become a loop of controlled emptiness. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. It wasn't living. It was maintenance. Around that time, I met someone, Claire. She was a friend of a coworker who came by the shop one afternoon. She had this steady energy about her, calm but alive. She asked too many questions, laughed at things I didn't find funny, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I didn't pull away. Maybe because she didn't expect me to be more than I was. She saw through my silence, but didn't try to fill it. For the first time in years, I let someone in. Slowly, carefully. It started simple. Coffee after work, short conversations, small glimpses of who I used to be. She told me once that I seemed peaceful. I almost laughed. If only she knew that peace was just another word for numbness. But she stayed. And little by little, I started wanting to stay too. She'd leave her jacket on my couch, her scent lingering in the air long after she left. I found myself waiting for it, missing it. She made the apartment feel less like a waiting room, more like a home. I didn't know how to handle that. Love, real love, terrified me, because it demanded surrender. It asked me to let go of control, and control was all I had ever known. So I started doing what I'd always done. I managed it. I measured my words, planned my emotions, built invisible walls around my heart. I thought I could love her without losing myself, but love doesn't work like that. It requires presence, not precision. One night, she told me I was distant. She said it felt like hugging someone made of glass, transparent, fragile, untouchable. I didn't argue. I just sat there, silent as always. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't trying to be distant. I was trying not to break. But she couldn't understand that silence was the only language I'd ever been fluent in. A month later, she left. No fights, no drama. Just a quiet goodbye at the door, the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. I didn't chase her. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at the space she left behind, feeling that old familiar emptiness returning like an old friend. The apartment felt smaller again, the air heavier. I poured a drink, sat in the dark, and realized I had built my entire life around the illusion of control, believing that if I managed everything perfectly, I'd never feel pain again. But control doesn't protect you. It isolates you. It turns you into a spectator of your own life. Over the next few weeks, I went back to my routines. Work, sleep, silence. But something in me had shifted. The walls I'd spent years building no longer felt safe. They felt suffocating. I started noticing things I used to ignore. The sound of laughter from the apartment next door, the way sunlight hit the kitchen counter, the dust gathering on the windowsill. Small, human things. Things that made me realize how disconnected I'd become. I wasn't living. I was surviving beautifully. And the scary part was I didn't know how to stop. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about my father. I wondered if he felt this same emptiness before he left. Maybe he wasn't running from us. Maybe he was running from himself. I hated that thought, because it made me understand him. And understanding him felt like becoming him. That night, I took the old photograph from my drawer, the one of me and Adam as kids, standing in front of the house. I stared at it for a long time. I looked at my younger face, at the boy who carried too much. I wanted to ask him if he ever imagined this, growing up only to live like a ghost. I turned the photo over, wrote something on the back without thinking. You don't have to fix everything. Then I placed it on my nightstand. For once, I wanted to believe it. But belief is hard when survival has been your only religion. That night, I dreamt of the old house. The sound of rain leaking through the roof. My mother's tired face. My father's boots by the door. I woke up with a heaviness I couldn't name. Maybe grief. Maybe clarity. Maybe both. It was the first time in years that I didn't get out of bed right away. I just lay there, letting the weight of my life press against me, realizing how long I had been running without moving. The illusion of control had kept me alive, but it had also kept me from feeling alive. It happened slowly at first, like a small crack in glass that no one notices until it spreads across the whole surface. That's how my collapse began, quiet, gradual, invisible. It started with sleep. I couldn't find it anymore. Nights stretched into mornings, mornings bled into work, and I moved through days like a shadow pretending to have weight. My coworkers said I looked tired. I told them I was fine, the same word I had been using since I was 10. But inside, I felt something unraveling. I had spent my entire life building walls to keep chaos out, and suddenly the walls were cracking from the inside. It wasn't a single event that broke me. It was accumulation, years of silence, control, endurance. Small disappointments layered over larger ones until I couldn't tell where the pain began. Every noise felt louder, every light harsher. Even small talk felt like a performance I couldn't keep up anymore. I remember standing in the shower one morning, water running cold, realizing I couldn't remember the last time I felt anything real. Not joy, not sadness, just emptiness pretending to be calm. That was the first time I admitted to myself that something was wrong. But admitting it and understanding it were two different things. I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't even know what help would look like. I had built my identity around being the one who didn't need it. Around that time, I got a call from Adam. He said Mom wasn't doing well. Years of exhaustion and stress had caught up to her. I flew back home for the first time in years. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was peeling, the walls yellowed, the furniture older but the same. It felt like stepping back into a life I thought I had outgrown but never really left. Mom was in bed when I arrived, frail but smiling. She said she was proud of me, proud of how strong I'd become. I smiled back, but inside, those words didn't feel like praise. They felt like a curse, because strong was the word that had kept me from breaking when I should have. I stayed for a few days, helping around the house, fixing leaks, cleaning, cooking, slipping back into the same old rhythm. It was muscle memory. But one night, as I sat by her bed, listening to her breathe, I felt this wave of guilt rise in my chest. Not because of anything I'd done, but because of how much I hadn't felt. I realized I didn't know how to love her anymore without feeling responsible for her. I didn't know how to just be her son. That scared me more than anything. When she fell asleep, I went outside and sat on the front steps. The air smelled like rain. I stared at the street, at the same cracks in the pavement I used to trace with my shoes as a kid. And I started crying, quietly at first. Then harder. It wasn't a cinematic kind of cry. It was messy, gasping, raw. It felt like something deep inside me had finally burst. Years of holding everything in, all spilling out at once. For the first time in my life, I let myself fall apart, and it didn't kill me. It just made me human again. I think that's what breaking really is, not destruction, but release. A surrender to the truth that you can't keep carrying everything. The next morning, I found Mom awake, sitting at the table. She looked at me like she knew. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Sometimes love is just presence, the quiet understanding between two people who've both carried too much. When I returned to my apartment, everything felt different. The walls, the air, the silence, none of it felt like safety anymore. It felt like a cage. I realized I had been mistaking isolation for peace, control for healing, independence for strength. I started leaving the apartment more. Long walks, no destination. I watched people, couples arguing, kids laughing, old men feeding pigeons. I noticed how life was always moving, imperfectly, messily. And for the first time, I wanted to be part of it. I started writing again. Small notes to myself. Fragments. Memories. I wrote about the boy who grew up too fast, about the man he became, about how both of them were tired of pretending. I didn't know if it was healing, but it felt honest. One night, I found the note I'd written months ago on the back of that photograph. You don't have to fix everything. I stared at it for a long time, then laughed quietly through tears. Because maybe that was the lesson all along, that life doesn't need to be fixed. It just needs to be lived. Around that time, I got a message from Claire. It wasn't much, just a simple, "Hey, how have you been?" I stared at it for hours before replying. When I finally did, my answer was different this time. I didn't pretend. I told her the truth. That I wasn't fine. That I was learning how to feel again. She didn't respond right away, and that was okay. Because for once, the silence didn't scare me. It felt honest. I sat by the window that night, listening to the city outside, cars, laughter, rain. Life happening. And I realized something. Breaking wasn't the end of me. It was the first real thing that had happened in a long time. It stripped away everything I used to hide behind, the strength, the control, the calm. And underneath it all, there was just me. The boy who never got to be a boy. The man who finally stopped pretending to be unbreakable. And for the first time, I didn't want to fix him. I just wanted to know him. Healing didn't happen all at once. It came in fragments, in small, unremarkable moments that no one else would notice. It began with mornings. I stopped waking up to alarms and started waking up to light. The way it filled the room through the curtains, soft and uninvited, made me realize how much I'd been living in darkness without even noticing. I stopped rushing through my routine. I let the coffee drip slowly, listened to the sound it made as it filled the mug. Some mornings, I didn't do anything at all. I just sat there, watching steam rise, letting time pass without purpose. It felt strange at first, almost wrong, like I was wasting something I couldn't afford to waste. But maybe that's what growing up too fast does. It makes rest feel like guilt. I was learning to unlearn that. I started calling my mother more often. Our conversations were shorter now, gentler. We talked about simple things, weather, food, neighbors. There was no heavy silence anymore, no hidden grief. Just two people finally talking like they'd survived something together. And maybe we had. She sounded lighter these days. Maybe because I finally stopped pretending to be strong for her. Sometimes love needs weakness to breathe. Adam had a baby. A girl. I went to see them a few weeks after she was born. The moment I held her, something inside me went quiet. She was so small, fragile, perfect. I thought about all the times I'd carried him as a kid, feeding him, protecting him, trying to be more than I was. Standing there, holding his daughter, I realized I didn't need to protect anyone anymore. Not him. Not Mom. Not even myself. The world didn't need another hero. It just needed me to be here, whole, present, honest. I looked at her tiny face and thought about how life always finds a way to start over, even after everything. I began going to therapy. At first, it felt awkward, sitting across from a stranger and trying to explain years of silence. I didn't even know where to start. But the more I spoke, the more I realized how much of my life I'd spent describing events, not feelings. It took me months to understand that difference. One day, she asked me a question that stopped me cold. She asked, "When was the last time you felt safe?" I sat there for a long time, unable to answer. I had built an entire life on responsibility, independence, survival, but not safety. It was in that silence that I realized what I'd been chasing wasn't success or love or peace. It was safety. The kind I never had as a child. Over time, I started revisiting old places, not out of nostalgia, but curiosity. The park near our old house, the convenience store where I used to buy candy for Adam, the alley where I used to walk home after school. Everything looked smaller, quieter. I wasn't the same person walking through it anymore. I felt like a visitor in my own past. There was no anger, no bitterness. Just understanding. Sometimes, healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about letting it stop defining the present. I even met Claire again months later. Not by plan, just by chance. It was at a bookstore. She looked the same, maybe a little softer around the eyes. We talked not about what went wrong, but about where we'd been. There was no tension, no need for closure. We were just two people who had learned how to live with their ghosts. Before leaving, she smiled and said I seemed lighter. I told her maybe I finally stopped mistaking weight for worth. She laughed. It felt real this time. At night, I often found myself writing. Not about pain anymore, but about presence. About the sound of rain against glass, the smell of laundry, the quiet moments that used to slip by unnoticed. I wrote letters to my younger self, the boy who thought love was something you had to earn by being good, strong, silent. I told him he did enough. That he survived. That it wasn't his job to fix everyone. And that one day, he'd get to live just for himself. There was one evening I'll never forget. I was sitting by the window, same as always, but this time there was no heaviness, no reflection pulling me backward. Just stillness. Outside, kids were playing in the street. Their laughter carried through the air, wild and careless. I watched them for a long time, and something inside me softened. I realized I didn't envy them. I wasn't mourning my childhood anymore. I was finally allowing myself to feel what I never could, the freedom to just exist without purpose. That's when I understood what it meant to become a boy again. Not in age, but in spirit. To find wonder in small things. To feel without fear. To stop running from life and start being part of it. I still have bad days. Days when old habits whisper, when silence feels easier than honesty, when I catch myself retreating behind that old armor. But now I notice it, and noticing is half the healing. I don't need to be perfect anymore. I just need to be aware, to choose differently, to forgive myself for being human. Sometimes I drive with no destination, music low, windows down, air cold against my face. In those moments, I think about the boy who grew up too fast. I think about how hard he tried, how much he carried, how quietly he endured. I don't resent him. I thank him, because without him, I wouldn't be here, in this fragile, imperfect piece. He built the bridge that led me back to myself. And now, standing here, I finally understand what growing up truly means. It's not about responsibility or strength or control. It's about softness. It's about knowing when to let go, when to rest, when to feel. It's about becoming whole enough to love without fear, to live without armor, to cry without shame. The psychology of a child who grew up too fast isn't about tragedy. It's about transformation, about the moment that child finally realizes he doesn't have to carry the world anymore. He just has to live in it. And I'm still learning. But now I do it slowly, like a boy again,